RINO Selling Out and no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today, of course, is Christopher Hopkins, who's on the other side of the camera. But we are also honored today to have the Honorable Brian Chisholm. He's a member of the Maryland House of Delegates. And of course, we want to thank Adam Katora, our producer. So this particular podcast is called RINO's Selling Out. And we are uniquely positioned here at Mark and the Millennials to talk about this because we are going to talk about one rhino in particular, and that is the governor of Maryland, Governor Larry Hogan, who has clearly sold out and is probably the nation's biggest rhino. And we are going to tell you why. So what has happened is, and we're going to give you some background, they're going to go right into the discussion. We have clips on this as well to prove it. So the governor of Maryland got into a tiff with the President of the United States at the very beginning of the pandemic when there was no testing. Why was there no testing at the beginning of the pandemic? Because we didn't even know what we were dealing with, right? We didn't know what this particular virus was. We didn't know how to test for it, so tests had to be created. And the first tests, I would imagine, were probably not so accurate, and then they got more accurate over time, plus tens of millions of these tests had to be created and manufactured and distributed. And so the governor of Maryland decided on his own to buy the tests somewhere else. And then when he did that, of course, he decided to grandstand. And he grandstanded because he basically said, well, the president couldn't deliver, so therefore, I bought these tests somewhere else. And so there's a lot of consternation and argument between the president of the United States and the governor of Maryland. And we're going to talk about that today in this podcast. And as I said, we have Delegate Brian Chisholm, a member of the Maryland House of Delegates. He's also a member of the Health and Government Operations Committee. And let me tell you something. If you're on that committee, you are an expert on health care policy in the state of Maryland. And it's highly complicated, so we have the right person for this particular podcast. But before we go there, before we go to the discussion, first we have President Trump in April of this year criticizing the governor of Maryland over the governor's purchase of test kits from, of all places, South Korea. We have that clip, and here it is.
The governor of Maryland could have called Mike Pence, could have saved a lot of money. Look at these different places. That's Maryland right there. So could have saved a lot of money, but that's okay.
To go to South Korea for
No, I don't think he needed to go to South Korea. I think he needed to get a little knowledge would have been helpful.
That's the president really tiffed in April at the governor of Maryland because what happened was it wasn't just enough for the governor of Maryland to purchase these test kits from South Korea. It was that the governor of Maryland boasted about the fact that he got them when no other governor could get them. And the governor of Maryland bought them from South Korea. And by the way, the governor of Maryland's wife is South Korean. She's originally from South Korea, so there was that connection. And then the governor, it wasn't enough. He had to basically say, see, I did something that the president couldn't do. In other words, he's playing pandemic politics. And I got to tell you something. This is the one thing that makes me angrier than anything about this year, 2020, right? There are a lot of things we could all complain about. There's no doubt about it. But when you have elected officials playing politics over a pandemic and trying to gain advantage and trying to get to the next job, and that's all they care about, and in my opinion, that is what this rhino governor, Governor Hogan, is doing right now. And I've had it. I've never spoken up about this before, but I'm doing it on this podcast. And so, first up, Brian Chisholm, what do you think?
I couldn't agree with you anymore. One of the things I said is what bothered me more than anything about the test kits was he stood on that tarmac and patted himself on the back. And what I told people when I found out that we were missing the reagents and the swabs was, he went out and told everybody he bought Cadillac margaritas, and then when nobody got drunk because he didn't get the vodka, he wanted to blame the president. And that's basically where we were. And then he started to double down, and he had them hidden from the public, and then we had them guarded by the National Guard. Didn't want anybody to see him. And I think he thought that if he could play it out long enough that everybody would forget about the test kits, but nobody did. And then in the meantime, then they went and doubled down and bought another set of 500,000 test kits. And we're not talking about small pennies here. We spent $9 million on the first batch, and then we upgraded for another $2.5 million.
So by we, the state of Maryland, through the governor, spent $9 million on test kits from South Korea in April. And then what happened? They didn't work?
They did not work because they were not they did not contain the swabs or the regions, which are
So what are
integral.
regions?
They're the integral part. I don't want to get too technical. I don't know if I can explain it exactly, but there's 4 components to all these test kits, from the swab test to the PCRs, that you need all 4 components in order to get an accurate
So
test.
if you don't have the regions, you can't test. You can't actually test once you. The swabs you need for obvious reasons, because that's what you need to actually test the individual. And the regions are the chemicals that are used to determine whether the person is positive or negative for
Right.
COVID.
It's a car without any wheels. I mean, it's got the
good.
axles, everything. All you got to do is
So the
throw wheel.
governor of Maryland spent $9 million on a car without wheels and then boasted about it throughout the media.
That is correct.
And so get this, podcast listeners, and we're going to discuss this in great detail. So to prove that the governor boasted about it in the media, also in April, the governor bought, of course, first he bought these test kits that don't work in April of this year. And then the governor proceeded to go on MSNBC and on a talking tour of the most liberal media outlets you can possibly imagine to try to disrespect and undermine the president of the United States during a pandemic. So here is MSNBC's Mika Brzezinski in April interviewing Governor Hogan. We have that clip, and here it is.
So my understanding that you and your wife were able to secure these testing kits. She speaks fluent South Korean. Would there have been an easier way to get testing to your state? Is the president right about that? Are you missing some knowledge? And if there was an easier way, what would it be?
Well, if there was an easier way, we certainly would have taken it. Every governor in America has been fighting to get tests since the beginning of this crisis, and it's probably been the #1 problem in America throughout this entire crisis. The president said that the governors are on their own and they should really focus on getting their own tests, and that's exactly what we did.
So that's Governor Hogan of Maryland talking to Mika Brzezinski on MSNBC saying, there aren't enough tests. Well, no kidding, because the United States of America had to basically bring in, military-style mobilization to be able to figure out what we were dealing with and then find companies to make the test kits, because the RINOs of the Republican Party and the Democrat Party have systematically exported jobs to China, the same place where a lot of this stuff is made. I mean, we barely have manufacturing capacity here. So before we go back to Brian, it wasn't enough that Governor Hogan went on MSNBC on his talking tour back in April this year, bragging about buying those test kits. You heard him on MSNBC's Morning Joe. Well, here is the governor on, of all places, The View with Whoopi Goldberg. We have that clip, and here it is.
How do you respond to who saying you didn't know what you were doing when there were all these testing labs that were right there for you to pick from?
Well, it's interesting. We had a great call yesterday with the vice president and with the president's own coronavirus task force, where I thanked the vice president and many members of the team for some of the progress that they had made over the past couple of weeks. And, I'm chairing the National Governors Association. And then they went over, to discuss some of the labs that are in each of the states. They provided us with a list of labs. We were very familiar with all of the labs in our state already, but the list they provided us was all federal labs, which I pointed out, and which we hadn't had any access to. But our discussion really was about tests. It wasn't about labs. So the president seemed to be a little confused yesterday in his press conference. I have no idea what set him off.
So this is why we're playing this clip, because that is the governor of Maryland with Whoopi Goldberg on The View. Why he decided to go on The View during a pandemic, I don't really know, because that was in April, at the absolute height of the pandemic. And the governor is saying, well, I don't know why the president was talking about labs in Maryland, because, what I really needed is tests. Well, so Brian, Delegate Chisholm, who's here with us, tell me, was it, because you said the governor bought these test kits, and he gets these test kits, but they're missing parts. It's a car without wheels. So the president actually, it sounded like, was correct, because the president's like, look, we have these labs that can do the tests, but we haven't massively manufactured the test kits because we have to integrate all this. Can you explain that, how that works, just for our podcast listeners?
Yeah, so when you get the test, obviously you have the components of the test. And you're going to the CVS or your local primary care physician. You're getting the test on, and then it's got to go to a lab to be analyzed. Only they can thoroughly analyze it, especially back then. Now we can actually you can get the results when you're sitting there, but it has to be sent to a lab. And we're sitting in the mecca of medical care in the state of Maryland. We do a lot of things wrong, but we are at the tip of the iceberg as far as medical care goes.
Because we have Johns Hopkins University.
That's
There's
correct.
NIH. There is the University of Maryland medical system. Go ahead.
So we had multiple places where these tests could be handled and given the results, but they can't work with a test that is not complete. So once again, it doesn't matter how many labs we had. It was that Governor Hogan bought bad test kits that didn't have all the components, which are worthless.
With $9 million. And by the way, that was Governor Larry Hogan 7 months ago with Whoopi Goldberg on The View. Well, get this, just 4 months ago, so in July, just 4 months ago, the Hogan came back on The View on his book tour, the governor of Maryland. So he had a book tour because he wrote a book during a pandemic to talk about how wonderful he is. Right? I mean, I'm just sorry. If there's a pandemic, you probably don't have time to write a book. And if there's a pandemic and people are dying, you probably don't have time to go on The View, and you probably don't have time to go on MSNBC, Governor Hogan. Maybe you should focus on the pandemic and stop playing politics. Nonetheless, he goes on The View 4 months ago, and The View actually asks him the first critical questions because reports are coming out at that time, just 4 months ago, maybe these tests aren't working. You know, we're hearing this, that people are not using them because they're incomplete. We had that clip, and here it is.
Governor, you paid $9 million for those kits from South Korea, but it was reported that you had been offered over 1 million tests at a lower price from domestic companies. The South Korean tests went unused for weeks because they lacked swabs and reagents, and it was just announced many of those tests were replaced with newer ones. Was that purchase a costly misstep on your part, do you think?
Not at all. It's really the key to our overall long-term testing strategy. Look, you have to go back in time when at the end of March, there were only a few thousand tests in early March that were done across the country when we couldn't find any access to tests from the federal government or from any suppliers in the U.S., and we were able to negotiate this deal with South Korea. It was, when I announced that day, I said it's one part of a long-term testing strategy.
So that's the governor. And by the way, if you are listening to the podcast, you can't see this, but if you're watching the podcast, you certainly can. The governor was hyperventilating when he was answering that question. He was literally hyperventilating on The View because for the first time, the liberal media, the progressive media, the fake news, they were actually asking him a reasonably good question, which was, yeah, we know you're here on the book tour, but you bought all those tests and you're bragging about them in your book. Did they even work? Because we're hearing reports that they didn't. Brian, what do you think?
That was all part of his plan. If you heard it in his clip there, it was all part of the plan. So part of the plan was, first step, we buy test kits that do not work. So that's a great business plan. We get scammed first, and then we'll double down and go back. But it was all part of the plan if you listen to it. I don't know who laid this plan out, but this is a horrible plan. Let's waste $9 million first. That's step one. And then we'll lie about it. And then step two, we'll try to fix the problem. And I'm not sure step two is even working, according to some of the University of Maryland, Baltimore. I think it was Dr. David Jarrell who came back and said, these are given false negatives and false positives. I don't even think the second grouping of 500,000 tests are actually working correct. So nobody's really sure how many of these actually were put into the population and how many worked and how many actually gave an accurate reading. So it's kind of all up in there. If you take the way I read the article, and I didn't even get this on Health and Government Operations, we bought close to 1 million tests. And at this point, nobody can say that even one worked correctly, because I did ask Secretary Robert Neal about this in a committee hearing, Zoom committee hearing. He was talking about saving thousands of lives with these test kits. And I said, will you go on record and say that we actually saved a life with one of these test kits? And have we actually used these test kits? And he said, Delegate Chisholm, I can't really answer that question because I don't know. And I don't understand how the Secretary of Health cannot know what test kits we're actually using. We spent $9 million. If you add it together, I think it's $11.5 million. I mean, I know the state's got a lot of money, but $11.5 million.
Well, of course, the governor would say, well, we got that from the stimulus money, and that's what we used it for. But here's the problem. Problem is, and I just want to clarify this, Brian, because you said this, and I want to repeat this for the podcast listeners, is the governor bought these tests for $9 million. They didn't work. Moreover, the reason they didn't work, among other reasons, is because of the fact that they were giving reports when you would use the test, that was highly unreliable. It was giving false positives and false negatives, and then the governor went and bought more stuff from South Korea, right?
No, to be accurate, I think the first set of test kits, they never used a single one of
They
them.
didn't use any of the $9 million worth of
No. So then they went back to South Korea and said, listen, these don't work. We need to buy the upgrade with all of the components. Like going back to the car dealership once again and saying,
well, it's like the car dealership. Now we want the tires, but we want the salesman's going, you need the undercoating too, you know? You need the undercoating.
Yeah. We thought you would like the car without the tires, but we understand you might want tires now too. It's going to be another $2.5 million. and now we're being told maybe the car doesn't work right So it's been a calamity of errors, and nobody wants to tell the truth about it. And you want to go back to the governor's book. He put this in his book on how many thousands of lives he saved with these test kits. I'm assuming he thought in some other universe that the test kits would magically come back and add all the components, and they would have worked.
It's just remarkable to me because, as you said, he put that in his book. And it shows you that during the pandemic, during the height of this pandemic, the governor of Maryland was already positioning himself to undermine the Trump administration, undermine the President of the United States during a pandemic so that the governor of Maryland could position himself to run for president because he was hoping to undermine the president so the president would lose this year in November. Which brings us to the present day, where Fox 5, which is a local Fox station in the greater Washington, Maryland area, Fox 5 reported just yesterday more detail about these test kits. So this brings us to the present day. And we have a funny tweet to read from the president's, which we'll read after you hear this clip from Fox 5 reporting about what really has happened with the test kits. We have that clip, and here it is.
And right now, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan's blasting a Washington Post story about those COVID-19 tests that he procured from South Korea last April.
That report alleging Hogan spent millions to get those tests, but they did not work. Fox 5's Sherman Verjay following these developments.
You may remember back in April when the first wave of the coronavirus hit our region, testing kits were hard to come by. Well, Governor Larry Hogan secured 500,000 tests from South Korea, and he credited his wife, who is Korean, for helping the state get those tests. Hogan spent nearly $10 million, but the Washington Post reports that money may not have been well spent. A Post investigation found the tests had flaws and were never used. The paper says Hogan and his top health officials never revealed to the public or the state legislature the tests had problems, and it turns out Hogan, in fact, paid the same South Korean company $2.5 million more for 500,000 replacement tests. Hogan says the Post got the story wrong.
Did they? Did the Post get it wrong? Did the Washington Post get it wrong, or who's right here?
It sounds like they're right on. That's what we've been led to believe. If you look at the facts, but
they being the Washington Post has finally reported this correctly. The fact that they could report anything correctly is amazing, but they finally reported that the governor of Maryland bought a bunch of really bum tests and then had to pay more money. Months later, right, that he had to buy tests. So by then, how many people actually died? But yet he put in his book, he saved so many people.
That's 100% accurate. So nobody really knows when he learned, and did he know early on that the original tests were not good, and that's why he put them under lock and key, and nobody was allowed to see them, and nobody was allowed to talk about them, and he was waiting for the savior of the second batch of 500,000, because that's what they're reporting, and originally we bought 500,000, so then we doubled down about another 500,000, so now we're at $1 million at a price tag at $11.5 million, and we still don't know if any of them worked, because and Washington Post accurately points this out, that they were still getting false negatives and false positives from these tests. So
maybe the test kits are like in a warehouse somewhere with all those Healthy Holly books, you know? So that's Insider Baseball podcast listeners. If you're not from the greater Washington area, yeah, it's Healthy Holly and the Hogan test kits. They're all stored somewhere, you know, and go ahead, finish. Go ahead, Brian.
No, I think you did an accurate job there. And I will say, I was surprised yesterday because when I read in the Washington, or on Sunday, the Washington Post, that said is coming under bipartisan pressure, and they quoted me in there, and it was actually accurate. I was like,
it's a shocker.
I told my wife I was gonna cut it out and put it up on the wall because this is the last time it's ever gonna happen.
So get this, podcast listeners. So you heard that Fox 5 just reported, and they just reported this, that these test kits were bogus, and Hogan lied about it all through the springtime during the peak period of COVID, and then wrote a book about how he saved lives with tests that are stored away somewhere that weren't even used. So this report just came out on Fox 5. So the President of the United States, of course, who throws any punch necessary, tweets the following. Report, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, anti-Trump hero, paid for flawed coronavirus tests from South Korea via, and it was on Breitbart News, among other things. This RINO, the president says, will never make the grade. Hogan is just as bad as the flawed tests he paid big money for. So, I'm sorry, I think that's really funny. And then, of course, Hogan responds back, yeah, well, if you had done your job, I wouldn't have to go to South Korea. So this just shows you, the governor of Maryland, it really shows how small he really is, because we have a national emergency, of course, at the beginning of the year. And you heard the governor then decides he's not going to cooperate with the federal government because the governor of Maryland wants to run against Donald Trump. He intentionally is part of the anti-Trump Lincoln Project and all of that group of people who just wants to see Trump go away, because the governor of Maryland is without question an establishment Republican, and that's where his comfort zone is. I obviously disagree with him. What do you think about that comment that I just made?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that he's got political aspirations far beyond where he's going to be tomorrow. And I think he believes that if there is a President Biden or a President Kamala Harris, however long it takes for them to enact the 25th Amendment, that he then is lining himself up for a stronger political run. And if Trump runs again in 2024, then maybe it sets Larry Hogan up to run for president at that time. One of the things that bothers me, and I want to just go back to it, and I don't want to belabor the point, but it's the pushing of the false narrative and continuing to push it. And I think that he feels like he can get some cover from the Biden administration if he is indeed certified on December the 14th. But he went out on that press conference last week, and this bothered me. It saddened me, and I wanted to bring it up before we move on, is he said, early on in the pandemic, we weren't sure what was going on. We just knew we were piling bodies up in an ice rink. And I took this on early on. This was a false story that they planted out there. We did lease ice rinks, and it was because nobody could have a funeral home. Nobody wanted to have a traditional funeral. It was $15,000, but you could only have 3 people in there. Well, nobody wants to pay that kind of money. But it was absolutely false that we ever sent a single person to the ice rink. But he said it in that press conference. And I was hoping that somebody would ask him to please retract that statement, because it's putting out this false narrative that we had all of these people dying in the state of Maryland and we didn't have anywhere to put them. So we were piling them up in an ice rink, which plays into the whole fear mongering. And that's what it seems like he's been on this role lately of how much fear can we instill in the public so that I can get my way. And if that's the way that he feels like he's got to paint the picture for him to have a presidential run, I don't know a single Republican that's going to vote for him. And
I would agree with you. I mean, I think that was extremely well put. And plus, Brian, if you wouldn't mind talking about this as well, really in Maryland, and this was hidden. This data was hidden. It certainly wasn't hidden from you because you're part of health and government operations and you're an expert on the subject matter. But my understanding was that they even tried to hide from you, the Hogan administration tried to hide from you, how many people were actually dying in nursing homes in Maryland.
Yeah, I started asking for this early on, and you can go back and look at the Baltimore Sun article. I started pushing that we needed those stats because we wanted an accurate picture, because we knew what had happened in New York. And these are our most vulnerable population. This is our the part of the greatest generation, some of them. And then we have our parents and our grandparents in there, and they're in an environment where this virus thrives. So we started asking, and the next night, the Baltimore Sun, and I can send it to you, puts out an article and says, Maryland Department of Health says nursing home and assisted living statistics are of no public interest and do not need to be seen.
Oh my gosh.
So the next day we got on the phone and we did push to get them out, and we found out that it was a large majority of the deaths were coming out of nursing homes, palliative care, which brings into question, when you're talking about every death is tragic, and it's tragic to every family. But when you come to find out that some of these people were in palliative care, they were on their deathbed, they were unconscious, and we're counting them as COVID deaths. I pointed this out early on. We didn't have a big problem with people dying because of COVID. We had a big problem with people dying with COVID. And, it doesn't take much of a math genius to figure out if we're going to give you $19,000 for a COVID death and zero for a flu death or a emphysema or whatever, we're going to give you COVID because it's money. And the nursing homes were really upset about this because they were telling us they weren't getting the PCPs, they weren't getting the test, they weren't getting any support really from the administration, and they were going out there saying that they were so proactive and they were so aggressive with this, but that's not the story we were getting from the nursing homes. And I know it wasn't an easy job. I'm not just beating up on them, but you can't go out there and say we have people dying in the street, but that's not what
but on the other hand, that is fair criticism that you're giving, and because I agree with you, it's super fair criticism, because if you have a governor who spent all of April, all of May, and all of June doing nothing but writing a book and bragging on The View and on MSNBC and on CNN about how he beat Donald Trump to getting tests that didn't even work, when he should have been spending his time not on those stations, but in Annapolis and focused on the nursing homes, because we know those were the most vulnerable. I mean, it's just, here's the thing. We knew it, and because we always know the people in nursing homes, we always know the people that are elderly and that need assistance are the most vulnerable. It's common sense. It's common sense. But instead, that's where he was spending his time. And the interesting thing is, the entire Republican caucus in Maryland, the entire Republican caucus, except for just a few people, and by a few I mean maybe 2 or 3, have actually spoken out. But you are the first person, in my mind, and I'm I'm going to take credit for this as well, who we are systematically on this podcast speaking out because enough is enough. And we're going to prove how the governor has tried to change the subject from his failed pandemic management and crisis of the tests to pivoting towards the vice president, and he's calling him the president-elect. So get this, podcast listeners. Governor Hogan is calling Biden, Vice President Biden, the president-elect. Proof of that? Well, here's CNN's Wolf Blitzer interviewing Governor Hogan just 3 days ago. So Governor Hogan, we got all this fury out there with the test kits, and the President of the United States is holding the governor accountable for the test kits. And we have the governor who's like, well, I'm going to just change the subject and go on, of all places, CNN, and talk to Wolf Blitzer about Vice President Biden, who's the president-elect. We have that clip, and here it is.
You've accepted the fact that that Biden is the president-elect of the United States, that he won the election, right?
I think I was the first Republican to do so. There's no question about that. And, I congratulated him the first night that the race was called. And, I think, more and more Republicans are finally getting to that point. And it's hopefully something that will get resolved here, very shortly.
But good old Larry Hogan was the first Republican to congratulate President-elect Biden, who, by the way, is not president-elect yet, which we'll explain in a minute. But Governor Hogan was the first to congratulate him. He was the first Republican to do that because Governor Hogan wants to run against President Biden in 4 years. That's why he wanted to oust Donald Trump to begin with, so that the club can all be back in Washington once again. Thoughts on this, Brian?
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe he should. I don't know how that call went, but maybe he was calling just to ask if Hunter Biden can get us some test kits, because my guess is he does a better job of delivering. At least he's bringing some stuff home with him. Probably at a better price. I don't know.
Where's Hunter?
That's exactly right. I tell you what bothers me about this, and he's listed as a RINO, which is Republican in name only, but I don't even know if he's really a Republican at this point, because to go out and make those kind of remarks that I'm the first Republican, well, you're disenfranchising. President Trump got more Republican votes than any other president in history. That's 70+ million people that feel disenfranchised right now. If we find out that there was fraud and abuse, but you can't prove it in court, then we're just going to have to lick our wounds and go on to fight another day, and that will be certified on December the 14th. But the governor doesn't know anymore if it's going to be certified yet. There's still a lot of things to be looked at. There was obviously a ton of irregularities in this election. So is it his job to anoint the vice president, become the president-elect, and the mainstream media? Because that's where he thinks his role is at this point. But
isn't it interesting how CNN and MSNBC, they're using Hogan, right? Yes. So did Wolf Blitzer just 3 days ago ask Governor Hogan about the test kits? Oh, no. Wolf Blitzer, because they're not interested in journalism over there at CNN. No, he was all too happy to have the governor come on CNN and talk about what? Talk about the fact that he's president-elect, that Biden is president-elect. And as you said, Brian, you're not president-elect in the United States per our Constitution until the Electoral College votes. They have to meet and then they have to actually vote. They vote on December 14th. At that particular time, then we will have a president-elect. So the governor is not only wrong via the Constitution, Wolf Blitzer is wrong as well, no surprise there, but isn't it interesting how that's the only place that he goes? Do you see Hogan on, any other news program other than The View, MSNBC, and CNN? Oh, no. But he's doing it now because he's trying to get cover for these test kits. That's what's really going on. And because he wants to run for president. Thought on that before we go to the next clip.
Yeah, well, the mainstream media obviously is just another arm of the Democrat Party right now. So the best thing they could do sometimes is go out and find that one Republican that aligns with the Democrat Party. And so Governor Hogan is always happy to step up and say, you know what, if you need a Republican that aligns with all the Democrats and all the liberal narrative that you're throwing out there, then I'm your man. Put me on.
I'm your guy. Call Larry Hogan. I'll throw the Republican Party under the bus all day long. So here's Wolf Blitzer in the same interview just 3 days ago asking Governor Hogan if other Republican governors are ready to accept Biden. And listen to Wolf Blitzer at the end of the clip. This is just, once again, proof that, CNN is not a media outlet. But nonetheless, we have that clip with Governor Hogan, and here it is.
I'll ask you, did the other 4 Republican governors in the meeting basically accept the fact and refer to him as president-elect?
Well, I don't want to give the details of the conversation. I don't remember exactly if everyone did, but I think most of them did acknowledge, we're talking about the issues. Obviously, they got on the call with the president-elect and the vice president-elect for a reason. Everybody was very cordial and I think recognizes the fact that Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris will be, inaugurated on January 20th.
I think so. You're absolutely right.
See, that's your Wolf Blitzer at the end. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's so funny. What a tool. I mean, that's not hard reporting, right? That's not reporting at all. That's basically, yes, you're right. Good. We got a Republican governor. Now we need to get more Republican governors on CNN to talk about the same thing because we don't want to follow the Constitution. So, why on earth would this governor, and it's not because he's a Republican. Republicans can go, I just want everybody to know this in podcast land, Republicans can go on any media outlet they want. But here's the thing. When you park your principles at the door and then you walk into CNN and you say, oh, that's okay, I left my principles out there, I'm willing to throw all of the Republican Party under the bus, including the President of the United States, and it's all about me because my name's Governor Larry Hogan. It's all about me. Thoughts on that?
I thought it was interesting he said he didn't really want to talk about what was said in the conversation because my guess, most of the Republican governors I know, especially if he was talking to Governor DeSantis in Florida, they were not backing Governor Hogan on this. I think that they probably took some pretty serious issue with it. But, he's been falling in line with all the other Democrat governors, so I'm sure they were happy to call him.
And Chris Christie.
And Chris Christie, yeah.
That's right, Chris Christie, his favorite Republican who helped him get elected in Maryland. And what's sad, too? The Republicans really worked hard to get Larry Hogan elected. They did. Yeah. They worked really hard. I have so many good friends who put up just so many signs. They made signs. They put together the signs. They installed the signs. They took them down. I'm talking about, Hogan for governor signs all over the state. And then you have this governor basically saying, y'all don't matter. Y'all don't matter. It's all about me. And he's willing to just do anything.
I could not agree with you more. And truth be told, I was a fan of the governor coming in. And I think there were a lot of people. I thought he knew what he was doing business-wise. But he has made such a dramatic change. And it's unprecedented, and it's unnecessary, in my opinion. You can still be a good governor without destroying your own party, but it's almost like goal number one. I'm going to go out there today and tell everybody why I'm against the Republicans or why I'm against this president, and this is how I'm going to make my way forward. And I've always told my son this, just like Mr. Miyagi, one side of the road, fine. Left side of the road, fine. Middle of the road, squished like a grape. He's trying to be in the middle of the road.
Mr. Miyagi, was that from the Karate Kid?
Yeah. You can't just walk down the middle of the road yelling at both sides of the road and expect that you're not going to run yourself into some trouble. Have some, like you said, and I think you said it correctly, have some principle. If you have principle, even if you're the most liberal people, and I say this about the House, even some of the socialists, if you tell me you're a socialist and you vote social and act socialist, I'm fine with it. I'm going to tell you why you should not be, but at least you have some integrity.
Bernie Sanders, great example, right?
Absolutely.
Bernie Sanders does not park his principles at the door. So when Bernie Sanders walks in the door, he's the same person inside, no matter what news outlet he goes to, as he was outside. And you say to yourself, hey, I don't agree with anything that guy says, but you know what? At least he believes what he believes. But the fact of the matter is that for those who actually listened to Bernie Sanders when he was running the first time against Hillary Clinton, when he was running the first time, he was saying a lot of similar things like, look, our country has been hollowed out. And he didn't articulate why that was the case. He was just blaming it on big corporations. But instead, what he should have been blaming it on is the fact that, we're exporting the jobs. But I know you make a great point, which is, you will no doubt respect people as long as they are consistent in their principles and what they believe. And this governor is not that person.
Yeah, it feels like he's continued to just pee down our legs and tell us it's raining because, I have serious problems with that. Just be who you say. If you want to be a Democrat, then change. It doesn't matter now. You're governor. Put a D in front of it. I don't care.
I think he is. I think he's. Don't you agree? I think really it's because we're calling this podcast "RINO Selling Out," but actually, I think with Governor Hogan, he's not even a RINO anymore. I think he's a Democrat.
Yeah, and
he's a Democrat.
He spoke the other day at the Ronald Reagan Museum, and I am a Ronald Reagan conservative, and I listened to what he was saying. I was like, Ronald Reagan does not believe in a single thing you're saying. I mean, you have destroyed any bit of conservatism in this state and in what you believe in. And that's fine. If you want to be that, then run as a Democrat liberal.
And he might very well do that. I would not be surprised if he changed his party affiliation to Democrat or maybe to Independent, and maybe that's what he should do. But nonetheless, we have Hogan talking about bringing people together. But first, we have this clip from CNN's Wolf Blitzer just 3 days ago talking about a Monmouth University poll where an overwhelming number of Republicans in the United States of America believe that there was incredible amounts of fraud and cheating in this election. And so first we have that question being asked by Wolf Blitzer, and then we'll have a second clip after that about Governor Hogan. But here is the first clip from Wolf Blitzer. Here it is.
There it is right there. Do you believe Biden won fair and square or due to voter fraud? This is Monmouth University poll. Fair and square among Republicans. Governor, among Republicans, 18% say it was fair and square, but 70% among Republicans say it was due to voter fraud. This is outrageous when you think about it. And when Biden takes office on January 20th, he's going to have to deal with such a divided country in the midst of such a deadly coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, so that's the Wolf Blitzer question to Governor Hogan. He's like, I can't believe this. I mean, all these Republicans, how can they possibly think there's fraud? That's not possible.
It was outrageous is what he was. He needs to tell them, you're crazy for thinking this, you 18%. Well, I think 18% of them may have worked in the Governor Hogan administration at some point in the last couple of years.
But the 70%,
Yeah, and it speaks volumes. It's not people that are delusional. They're looking at a lot of either anecdotal, some real statistical anomalies when you have votes coming in 138,000 to 0, and you have perfect ballots, and you have, you
have no down ballot markings, right? It's just the president. So like hundreds of thousands of people in inner cities only voted for president and nobody else. I don't think so. Not likely. In fact, incredibly unlikely.
Yeah, and you have mail-in ballots that were coming in without any creases in it. I don't know how you mail something without folding it. And you're right. All of these, we were told before the election that all of these incumbents were going to lose. They were going to pick up 15 to 20 different, not a single Republican incumbent lost, not a single one. And most of them won huge. So everybody that had a Republican name behind them followed the president's coattails, hung on to him, and won decisively in most places. And now we're supposed to believe that all of these people voted for the down ballot Republican but did not vote for President Trump. Just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well said. And we have a Governor Hogan who's on CNN who's basically trying to say, hey, I'm Governor Hogan. I'm going to try to remake the Republican Party in my image. I'm like, I don't think so. So you heard that question from Wolf Blitzer just a few days ago to Governor Hogan, talking about the Monmouth University poll where Republicans overwhelmingly do not trust the results of this particular election and believe there was massive fraud. Here's Governor Hogan's response about polarization. Here it is.
Well, I did an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal talking about just those things and saying that, I was pleased with the president-elect's comments when he came out and talked about trying to bring the country together, trying to work towards a bipartisan compromise on getting things done and bringing, even if you didn't vote for him, if you're a Republican or Democrat, he's going to be an American president. I think that's the exact right tone for him to have. And if he continues along those lines, I said, I look forward to working with him in a bipartisan way. And I hope that we don't continue this divisive, angry politics on both sides.
So here is the governor of Maryland who spent all year undermining the Trump administration with respect to test kits and then basically buying them and they didn't even work. And then undermining the Trump administration again and again, including, of course, presently. And now saying, well, I want to work together with President-elect Biden. We need to stop the polarization. The country is polarized. Well, look, to be clear, the country is polarized, right? But Governor Larry Hogan has not been someone on the national stage who has tried to lessen the polarization as far as I'm concerned. If anything, it's all about him. And when you make it all about you, that it's all about your advancement, that creates more polarization. What do you think about his statement on polarization?
I think that if you look at it, you do have to ask, what is he aiming for? Because he, as you said, he was the arbiter of a lot of the polarization. There was no doubt he did not like President Trump. He said he was actually going to write in Ronald Reagan. I don't know if Reagan would have taken that vote, to be honest with you, but he said he was going to write it in. So is he telling Vice President Biden now that he actually voted for him? I don't know. But bipartisan is one of those words that's always bothered me because it seems like bipartisan means we Republicans, we yield to them and give them whatever they want, and they might throw us a scrap. We never win in bipartisan ways. But as you know, when you look at the political landscape now, there are a lot of rugged individual conservative Americans that followed the Trump kind of ideology of, we trust you to make the right decisions. We trust you to go out and build your own life. We as Republicans want everybody to flourish. And we believe in that. That's what built America. But Governor Hogan's now going out and saying, no. You got to believe in the government. We will lead you. We'll tell you where to stay, how many people you can have in your house. We'll tell you what restaurants you can go to and what time you can stop eating. And it's almost become this Democrat divide. So when he says bipartisanship, I don't know, is he going to try to work with the Republicans because he's going to be a Democrat? I don't understand where the bipartisan stuff comes from. If you're the one just trying to destroy the Republican president, knowing how popular he is, and I just pointed out, it's one of the most popular presidents in history for the Republicans. So I don't understand his line.
So let me ask you something. I want to clarify this. Did you say that Governor Hogan publicly came out and said that in this election that just occurred, that Governor Hogan, voted for Ronald Reagan? He wrote him in?
I thought I read that somewhere that he was going to write in Ronald Reagan.
So I think you're right. So I just want to clarify this. So listen to this podcast, listeners. And I know Brian agrees with this. No matter who you are, right? If you do a write-in for Ronald Reagan, as an example, who's obviously dead and was a great president, certainly my hero as well. But if you voted for Ronald Reagan and you're governor of Maryland and you're proud of it, really what you're saying to the people of the United States is that you're actually voting for Kamala Harris, because a vote not for Donald Trump is a vote for Kamala Harris. Why? Because Biden, assuming that he is indeed elected and that he is chosen in the Electoral College, Biden is 78 years old, and he's clearly losing mental capacity. We all know it, right? We don't wish it upon him, but he is nonetheless losing his mental capacity, no doubt, as you would expect anyway from someone who's getting up in the years. But with Biden, it's much more obvious. And then you have to ask yourself the question, well, at some point, Kamala becomes president in his 4 years. And so basically, Hogan voted for Kamala. Because he voted against Trump, he voted for Kamala, no matter who else he voted for, whether it was Ronald Reagan, whether it was George Bush, whatever. And this is what's so troublesome with that. So he voted for a communist. I mean, Kamala is a communist, without question. I mean, you saw her ad. What matters is when everybody's on top of the mountain, everybody's got equity. Everybody's the same.
And Kamala Harris grew up extremely wealthy. She's from an extremely wealthy family, and I think there's either a little bit of guilt there, or keep the barbarians at the gate, leave me alone. I'm with you, but it's one of those. The Democrat Party used to be the party of the middle class, but we're the only ones fighting for the middle class, and nobody did more for the middle class than President Trump. So I guess the question for Governor Hogan is, are you against the middle class, and do you believe just in crony capitalism at the top and keeping the low-income people at the low income? Because that's what you did, because you're exactly right. When you write in you write in Ronald Reagan, you voted for Kamala Harris. And you went out publicly and said this, so you're telling every Republican, I'm not with you with this election, I'm with Kamala Harris and the communists.
So what's funny is, great point. So what's funny is the Washington Post had an article talking about how Hogan voted for Ronald Reagan, and I just want to read a couple of paragraphs. It says, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan's decision to repudiate President Trump by casting a write-in vote for Ronald Reagan has drawn swift and sustained backlash from many Democrat supporters and some anti-Trump Republicans who had admired Hogan's willingness to break with the White House. He didn't break with the White House. He's been anti-Trump because he wants to run for the White House. On social media, in comments on news stories and in a newspaper editorial over the past 4 days, the moderate Republican, Governor Hogan, with national ambitions, endured heavy criticism and open mocking for picking a man who has been dead for 16 years. The comments range from jocular "who is going to tell him?" reminders that Reagan is ineligible, to outright condemnations of Hogan's choice as childish, or an act of cowardice. And here's my favorite quote. So listen to this quote. "The vitriol that I have seen, he's being made fun of," said political scientist Todd Eberly, a professor at St. Mary's College of Maryland who studies polarization and presidential politics. It's become a national joke that he voted for Reagan. So let me just say this. That's Todd Eberly that said that at the end. Todd Eberly is a professor at St. Mary's College of Maryland, and Todd Eberly is the biggest anti-Trump hater. In fact, I think he has a mental disorder. He's so hateful of Todd Eberly is of Donald Trump. And he's a state-paid college professor who, according to the Washington Post, Todd Eberly studies polarization. I mean, hey, Todd Eberly, why are you studying polarization? You're creating more polarization. Just look at your tweets, you idiot. So anyway, so that's the Washington Post talking about good old Larry Hogan voting for Ronald Reagan. So next up, we have Governor Cuomo cancels Thanksgiving. That's right, Governor Andrew Cuomo cancels Thanksgiving. So Governor Cuomo of New York prohibits gatherings of more than 10 people at private residences. Yes, let's say that again. Governor Cuomo says that you can't have more than 10 people at your house in your private home. You can't do that, according to him. We have a couple of clips on that, but before we get to that, I want to hear Brian Chisholm's comment on this. What do you think, Brian?
I did. It's absurd at its on the very surface to begin with. But I did have this question because when I heard this, I was like, well, if we talk about equality and equity and all that, so what if Cuomo lives in a 7,000 square foot mansion and his brother David lives in a 500 square foot apartment? Is it fair that David can have 10 and Governor Cuomo can only have 10 as well? Because I think you could space out better than the 7,000 square foot. But it just goes to show the insanity. And I can't believe we're even here. I mean, we've seen a lot of evolution in this country.
Scary.
But it's scary to me that we have governors going out telling people how many people they can have gather in their private residence for Thanksgiving.
It is. It's absolutely scary. And get this, the New York sheriffs, many New York sheriffs have refused to enforce that rule, limiting 10 people per private residence. So here's Fulton County Sheriff Giardino saying he will not enforce the governor's orders. Obviously, that's really a good thing. So finally, sheriffs are like pushing back and saying, well, you want me to enforce that? You want me to go like knock on someone's door and say, sorry, it's your house, I know, but there are more than 10 people here, so therefore, we're going to start arresting people. We have that clip, and here it is.
But by the same token, one of the worst things we're seeing is the isolation of people not being able to engage with other people. Now, there's a big difference between setting a time limit at bars, setting a number of people at bars and restaurants, and social distancing, and getting together with your own family. Constitutionally, there's some problems with an executive order. There's no sanctions. I can't go arrest somebody. They don't get fined. Giving them the benefit of the doubt, I believe his intent is to try to slow things, but I think it does more damage. I live in a county of 55,000 people, and unlike the governor, I believe people in my county are smart enough to make their own decisions.
Thoughts about that? People making their own decisions. You're on HGO. Do you think there's probably, since you're on Health and Government Operations Committee in the state of Maryland, and you're a member of the House of Delegates, I mean, clearly there must be a lot of mental health issues as a result of people not being able to gather.
Yeah, we mentioned bipartisan issues earlier, and I think that the suicide problem that we face in the state of Maryland is horrible. It is gut-wrenching. I don't care who you are. You sit in there and hear some of these stories. It's terrible to listen to. It's a serious problem. And, if you think about this, we do have mental health issues. But one of the number one causes of suicide is loneliness. And people tell you that all the time. Loneliness is a scary place to be and to be in fear. And when you're telling people that they can't gather, there's something magical and vital about the human interaction. And you have to be able to have that human interaction to find real peace and love in your life. And if you want people to just stay at home and not gather with the people that they have gathered with over generations, this has got long sustaining problems that are attached to it. And when you let them in the door, as you and I both know, it's hard to get stuff back from the government once they take it.
Absolutely. So well said. So get this. Mayor de Blasio has a snitch line. So, remember, if you have more than 10 people at Thanksgiving, don't worry. You can always call or text Mayor de Blasio with information, secretive information and pictures, because Mayor de Blasio has a snitch line. We have a clip on that with Mayor de Blasio talking about the snitch line himself. You can't believe it. Here it is.
Now it is easier than ever when you see a crowd, when you see a line that's not distanced, when you see a supermarket that's too crowded, anything, you can report it right away so we can get help there to fix the problem. And now it's as simple as taking a photo. All you got to do is take the photo and put the location with it, and bang, send a photo like this, and we will make sure that enforcement comes right away. Text the photo to 311-692, and action will ensue. Enforcement will come to get the help we need, or you can use the 311 app, send that photo there, and you'll make sure immediately there's follow-up. Look, this is important. I want to keep reminding people, it's about saving lives. Sending that photo in is going to help make sure that people are kept apart, and that's going to stop the disease from spreading, and that's going to save
So that's
lives.
right out of 1984. So here's what I would suggest to all podcast listeners. Take a selfie with you and all of your friends at Thanksgiving. And even if you don't live in New York City or New York, take a selfie with all of their friends, and everybody flip the bird to Mayor de Blasio and send it to him to that text number. I mean, that's what needs to happen. That's what needs to happen. Right? Because you are responsible for yourself. Ultimately, it is your house. The people that you have in your home is up to you. Final thoughts on this?
Yeah, it bothers me deeply that they have weaponized the American public. So now you can seek revenge. What if it's your girlfriend that's mad at you and finds out you're having 6 or 7 people at your house, and then she calls this text line and says, yeah, she has 12 there. Well, they're going to show up and they're going to harass you. And that has happened to small businesses. I've been fighting for every small business in Anne Arundel County, where I don't think we have to go to New York. Our Anne Arundel County executive is along these lines as well. And I have businesses telling me that they have health inspectors now have been deputized, and I haven't gotten proof on that yet, by the liquor board going in, and that's the one thing that they know that they can threaten with. We will take your liquor license. If you're a restaurant without a liquor license, you might as well close up the doors today. But what they've done is they've weaponized both the health department, the liquor board, and private citizens to go put businesses out. So if you don't like a business for one reason or another, instead of letting the free market work and letting people decide for themselves, we've allowed people to go destroy other families, other people, and other businesses with this line of thinking in the quote-unquote interest of saving lives, which is, it has no statistical proof behind it whatsoever. And I've never walked into somebody's house and been surprised that so many people were there and felt in danger and felt like I had to stay. You can leave if you want. I've never been surprised by or felt fear in somebody's house because too many people were there, or even in my own house. We all have the ability to make our own decisions and apply critical thinking, and this is more of the government knows best. We're gonna put the fear of God into you, and if you don't listen to us, we're gonna have your neighbors call on you, and that's a very sad place to be. And you were talking about, dividing the country up. What does this do? This divides neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother again, and it's horrible.
So well said. I couldn't say it better. And that's Governor Cuomo cancels Thanksgiving. And that is it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. A special thank you to Delegate Brian Chisholm from the great state of Maryland, and of course our producer, Adam Couture, our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.